I, Brian Davidson, am a late bloomer. In high school, I was a boy, not a man. Despite my pretty face, I was short and chubby. It wasn't until my freshman year of college that I began to mature, but then it was the most striking transformation my doctor had ever seen. By the time I graduated from college, I was 25 centimeters taller, 30 kilograms heavier, and had 20% less body fat than I did my freshman year of high school, which was 195 centimeters tall, and 105 kilograms overweight with 10% body fat. Although I was a boy in high school, that didn't mean I didn't have mature thoughts. I was fascinated by Virginia Brown, a real woman in high school, not a girl. A year older than me, Virginia was the nicest person I'd ever had the pleasure of talking to, intelligent, gracious, and as beautiful as a woman could be. Plus, she had a body that poets could marvel about for decades. Although she was always modest, she was the queen of everything throughout her high school career, and yet no one ever outwardly envied her because of her modesty, poise, and grace. Although Virginia was always gracious when I interacted with her, I never had even a tenth of the courage necessary to have an extended conversation with her, let alone ask her out on a date. Virginia Brown was the woman of my dreams. Fantasies have one thing going for them. They have to be put aside when faced with real life on a daily basis. By the time I graduated from college, Virginia Brown was just a pleasant illusion from the past. I fell in love with Missy Granger 2 years after graduating from college, and after a year of dating, we were married. Missy is a beautiful woman with a feisty personality. I think she can best be characterized as a firecracker. However, her energetic personality can be her best or worst quality, depending on the circumstances. This is her best trait during most social events and business negotiations. Her worst is when she perceives neglect or insult, even if it wasn't intentional. Since she's also sexy, relaxed in bed, intelligent, and generally fun to be with, I've never had much of a problem with her occasional antics or humiliation. That is to say, I never had a problem until an episode of my past idea of a woman from my fantasy came off my lips. After Missy and I were married about 2 years ago, I showed up to a party of young 20-something men on a Friday night, and I was hungry. I hadn't eaten anything in the hours before the celebration and expected to be served food. It turned out that the only food served was banal appetizers of the kind I usually avoid in order to keep my body fat level at 10%. However, there were also dangerous rum cocktails, which, given the general merriment at the event, I drank far too greedily, resulting in only the second time in my life I've ever gotten intoxicated. While I don't remember exactly what happened or what was discussed, although Missy apparently remembered, some goon got the idea to play a game in the living room. The game was actually a purchased, professionally executed game called something like Awkward Scenarios. At least as interpreted by our host, the rules of the game were that one person would pull out a card with a question written on it and ask the other person the question listed on the card. All questions could have awkward answers. The person answering a question could answer the question, refuse to answer it, and then answer the question on the next card given, or pass it on to someone else. Passing it on could only be done once during the game. If by majority vote the other players thought the answer was wrong, the contestant had to throw $5 into the pot, which would eventually go to the winner. I never understood how it was determined who got the cards or how the point guard chose who to answer. However, wanting to prove myself and get caught up in the action, I played along. Things didn't work out too badly for me, and there were some funny moments when I was asked the question, "Who is your fantasy woman?" Of course, a reasonable answer would be, "My dear wife, Missy," although that would probably be found to be untrue and would result in me throwing $5 in the bank. However, as I said, I was not in the habit of drinking alcohol on an empty stomach, and suddenly a long, forgotten memory of my high school sweetheart came to mind. I blurted out, "Virginia Brown!" Almost everyone but my wife and I laughed when Missy asked, "Who the hell is Virginia Brown?" I couldn't resist answering. The sweetest, most beautiful woman in the world, who was the prom queen at New Trier High School. Then everyone laughed, except Missy. The game continued until Barb, the hostess of the place, was declared the winner and took the $30 in the jar. I was too drunk to drive, and there weren't enough healthy people around to carry my 105 pounds to the car, even if Missy had been willing or able to drive, which apparently she wasn't interested in. So Missy and I ended up spending the night at the party, lying fully clothed on the couches. The next day, Missy was a little annoyed, but I never could figure out why until Barb explained it to me the next morning at breakfast. Fortunately, things returned to normal at the Davidson house a couple days later. About a year after my answer to the fantasy woman question, the new president of the company I worked for, Remarkable Widgets Inc., commonly known as RWI, decided that all managers at my level from offices around the country should go together for a week-long internship. I printed out a copy of the email announcing the trip. The attachment to the email included the names and titles of all the managers who would be attending. I just went through the list without paying much attention to it. That evening, I brought the email home to show Missy the dates. In keeping with her predilection for detail, she read it more carefully than I did. "Is this Virginia Brown listed here the woman of your dreams?" Missy asked snidely after looking at the attachment. Since I hadn't looked through the list thickly, I had no idea if that name was there, although Missy obviously didn't believe it when I told her that. When I looked at the list carefully, I found that Virginia Brown, Milwaukee office, was only one name away from Brian Davidson, Lake Forest office, since Lake Forest was a suburb of Chicago, where I worked, and only 60 miles from the Milwaukee office. Looking at the list, I shrugged and said, "I doubt it. It's a pretty common name, and by now she must be about 28 years old, and of course she's married and has a different last name." "Why? Because she's so attractive," Missy growled. "What's with the demeanor?" I asked. "Isn't she the woman of your dreams?" Missy growled back again. We had what I hoped was a minor spat after that, but it turned serious when I tried to have intercourse that night, and Missy coldly refused and commented, "I don't want to be a surrogate love interest for you. Damn, Virginia!" After staring at Missy's back with growing anger for half a minute, I grabbed my pillow, abruptly got out of bed, and headed to the guest room to sleep. It was only the second night in our married life that we went to bed angry. Only this time, unlike last time, I wasn't going to apologize. For the entire next week before we left, the relationship was cordial, albeit a bit icy. At least Missy didn't bring up the subject of surrogate love again, and we even had sex 2 nights before I left. I'm not sure exactly why I did it, but during our 2 sexual escapades, I gave it my best shot and had turned Missy, and myself, into smoldering coals by the next morning. Missy's goodbye kiss was only fleeting, but I was determined not to let her negative attitude piss me off. I was sure I'd come back with a picture of a different Virginia Brown than the one I'd gone to high school with, and I hoped the Virginia Brown who worked at RWI was 50 years old, 20 pounds overweight, and warts all over her face. When I got to the Boundary Waters area in northern Minnesota, most of the other RWI managers were already there. I knew 4 of the 20 expected. Unfortunately, one of those I knew was Virginia Brown. Although I had hoped it would be another overweight Virginia Brown, this was the woman of my dreams. Even more unfortunate was the fact that, if it was possible, she looked even sexier than she had in high school. The only good thing was that she didn't recognize me. And how could she, since I was now tall, muscular, and trim, not the short, chubby, flabby kid from New Trier High School? Remaining as friendly as ever, Virginia quickly became the star in the group. For the first 2 days, I noticed her looking in my direction with either a puzzled look or a smile on her face, but I tried my best not to meet her gaze. It was very hard to suppress the fantasy woman feeling in me, especially when she wore, thankfully not all the time, Daisy Duke shorts or bikini swim trunks that emphasized her long thighs and firm ass. On the 3rd day, the dam broke. After we pulled our canoes ashore and took a lunch break, I tried to find a rock to sit on for safety. No sooner had I lowered myself onto it than a goddess appeared with a wide smile on her face. "Brian, isn't it?" She grinned, sitting down next to me and stretching her delicious legs out in front of her. Yeah. Virginia, isn't it?" I answered, thankfully not as slurred as I had been in high school. You know, Brian, I've been trying to figure out why I recognize your face, and I think I figured it out, she chuckled. Really? Was my lame answer. I knew Brian Davidson from New Trier High School in Winnetka, Illinois. Could that have been you? I did go to New Trier, I replied. Did you? Yes, I did. You remember Virginia Brown? That's me. I think I was 1 grade older than you? I knew the question was settled, so I pretended to understand. Oh, yeah, you looked familiar. You were a cheerleader or something, weren't you? I weakly replied. After that, we chatted like old friends while I struggled to keep something on my lap so she wouldn't see the unwanted tent that had formed in my groin. She made a few remarks about how well I had matured and what a muscular physique I had, which probably caused me to blush profusely. Unfortunately, Virginia began to treat me much friendlier than the other men on the trip, and did her best to team up with me in bonding exercises and make me her partner during the canoe trips. The canoe trips were particularly unpleasant because she sat on the bow and I admired her perfect ass and golden hair poking out from under her helmet, and in between, her entire perfect body. In fact, even more unpleasant than canoeing were the bonding exercises, especially the trust fall, where she would fall on her back and rely only on me to pick her up. Trust falls often resulted in my hands inadvertently touching her stunning breasts, which she never complained about. Instead, she smiled understandingly. Of course, having sex during the trip would have been totally inappropriate, if not physically impossible, for many reasons, including the fact that I was married. Virginia knew I was married, yet she never gave any indication that she had a husband, and in fact denied it on at least 2 occasions that I overheard. She was extremely flirtatious. When the trip was over and we took the vans to the Minneapolis airport, Virginia took the seat next to me and fell asleep with her head on my shoulder and one hand on my leg. As was my custom, I covered my lap with a magazine during the trip. At the airport, Virginia gave me an inappropriately long goodbye hug and said, "We should meet when we get home. You're only 80 kilometers from my house." "I'm sure Missy would like that," I replied, trying hard not to suggest any relationship other than platonic. When I got home, the first question Missy asked, completely direct without any pretense or foreplay, was, "So, was Virginia Brown the woman of your dreams?" "Would you please stop there already? We've had this discussion before." A cavalier remark made when I was drunk for only the 2nd time in my life cannot be taken as gospel. I had a high school crush on her. I am married to the love of my life and am now an adult. I don't have any feelings for her. However, to answer your question, yes, that was the same Virginia Brown who went to New Trier High School, and she still looks pretty good, I snapped back. "Did you get to have her?" Missy perked up. "Where the hell does that come from?" I replied. "No, I didn't sleep with, fondle, or kiss her. I'm married to you, bitch, and I'm not cheating." After exchanging a few more pleasantries, I tried to defuse the situation, but with limited success. At least I got Missy to have dinner with me, and that night I induced her to have sex and tried my best to show her that I must have been chaste since I had given her nearly a dozen finishes. Things were quiet in the Davidson household for a few weeks before all the shit really spilled out. The RWI CEO, a wise man, sent out a photo album of the adventures captured on the trip to everyone's homes. Unfortunately, Missy got home before I did, got the mail, opened the envelope with the photo album, and looked through it. I probably only touched it 3 or 4 times on the entire trip, unless you count the car ride back to the airport and the unsolicited Virginia hug when we got there. Sure enough, in one of the pictures, I was holding her hand as she stepped out of a canoe that wasn't properly strapped to the shore, and she had a big smile on her face. There were other photos that captured both of us, although we were not touching each other. However, the photos were of high quality and clearly showed Virginia's beauty. When I got home the day the album arrived, Missy was nowhere to be seen. However, there was a sticker attached to the picture of me helping Virginia out of the canoe that read, "Looks like you at least mentally slept with her." Missy never showed up that night, but I never even bothered to call her cell phone. If she was pissed off about the pictures, I was even more pissed off at her for her distrust and completely unbearable attitude. I didn't know for sure where this was going, but if she didn't have a different attitude, it wasn't going to end well. I left the photo album where it had been when I got home the next morning as I left for work. When I got home the next evening, Missy still wasn't home. We had to work things out. Either she would completely change her position or I would file for divorce. Since I didn't know when she would be home, and I certainly wasn't going to call her to ask, before leaving for work the next day, I set up the alarm system in our house so that it would send me a text notification when the alarm code was entered correctly. The next day, just before lunch, I received a notification that someone had broken into the house. Obviously Missy, since she was the only one with the key and code to disable the alarm. I immediately got in my car and drove home. Missy's car was parked in the driveway and the other car was parked outside. I quietly entered the house and immediately noticed the clothes scattered on the stairs and muffled sounds coming from upstairs. I took a deep breath, pulled out my iPhone, turned on the video function, and walked up the stairs. I couldn't believe it. Actually, maybe I could. But Missy was lying naked on our bed while some asshole was on top of her. I quietly walked around them, videotaping everything that was going on and making sure I had a good view of both of their faces. The asshole finally noticed me and yelled, "What the hell?" Missy looked in my direction and yelled. As calmly as possible, but with as much sarcasm as possible, I said, "Don't mind me, I'm just packing." I pulled my suitcase out of the closet and put my iPhone, which was still recording, in my pocket. As I was throwing stuff into the suitcase, the bastards obviously split up. Missy started yelling, "So you can have the woman of your dreams and I can't have fun." I ignored her. The asshole walked up to me, still naked, and said, "I need you to delete this video," grabbing my arm. I threw his hand off my shoulder, and with the most ferocious look I was capable of, I barked, "If you touch me again, asshole, I'll make sure you become a soprano. Go back to having a whore." I then proceeded to pack my things into my suitcase. About 20 seconds later, I heard the trigger pull, and the asshole said, "Give me your phone or I'll blow your balls off." I turned around and saw that he was holding something that looked like a 9mm pistol. He obviously wasn't thinking straight because he was standing too close to me for the gun to scare me. I pretended to be scared and nervous. I said some bullshit like, "Please don't shoot. Whatever you want." As I shakily pulled my still-recording iPhone out of my pocket and made sure it captured him standing with the gun pointed in my direction for a moment. Funny enough, my shaky hand dropped the iPhone on the carpet a half-meter to my left and his to my right, and when he followed it with his gaze, I pounced. I grabbed the asshole's hand with the gun. I thought I heard Missy squealing in the background and pointed the gun at him, knocking him to the floor. I squeezed the trigger above his finger as we hit the floor, and the gun was pointed at his left shoulder. The sound of the shot making a large hole in his shoulder was deafening, and he dropped the gun, screaming in pain. I pulled out my iPhone, it was still recording, and got a video of him rolling on the ground, screaming, and me kicking the gun under the bed so he couldn't reach it. By now, Missy was screaming and sobbing uncontrollably. I finished packing, closed my suitcase, turned off the record function on my phone, and dialed 911 as I walked down the stairs. I told the 911 operator that she needed to send an ambulance and police to my address and then terminated the call. I then emailed the video to my email address, my attorney's address, and my accountant's address. I put my suitcase, home laptop, and a couple other things from my home office in the trunk of my car and sat on the porch waiting for first the paramedics and then the police to arrive. I told the paramedics where to find the asshole and about the gunshot wound to his left shoulder, and told the police that the gun was under the bed, so the asshole probably couldn't reach it anymore, but to be careful. Missy must have put his boxers and pants on the asshole, because when he was carried out on the stretcher, he had them on, but no socks, shoes, shirt, or sports jacket. His eyes were glassy, but I'm sure he saw me smile and wave at him. By the time the first two police officers on the scene had gone downstairs, a forensics team, another patrol car, and a plainclothes car that looked remarkably similar to the one on the street had arrived. The two cops, who had the perp's gun in a plastic evidence bag, a shoulder holster, and some paperwork, talked to the two plainclothes cops for a couple minutes. The plainclothes policeman then approached me. I started up the video on my iPhone again. "What happened upstairs?" the older of the two policemen asked. "I came home and found my wife sleeping with some guy I had never seen before. I videotaped them, and as soon as they saw me there, I told them to just ignore me while I packed up. As I was packing, this asshole who had my wife pointed a gun at me and told me to give him my iPhone. I lunged at him, knocked him to the floor, and his gun went off, putting a big hole in his shoulder. I then shoved the gun under the bed, finished packing, and called 911. I have it all on video, I answered. Did you know this guy was a cop? The younger of the two asked, with a very snide look. I was quiet for a second, looking at the younger cop, stood up and said, "Change your fucking tone or this interview is over. Understand, asshole?" The young cop didn't like my hostility, but the older man seemed to calm him down. "We're just trying to gather facts," he said, answering the jerk's question. No, I didn't know he was a cop, and I still don't, because I haven't seen any evidence that he is. He didn't identify himself as such when he pulled a gun on me and threatened to shoot my balls off if I didn't give him my iPhone, I growled. At that moment, I saw a ragged girl being led to one of the police cars. The elderly policeman said, "We would like to take you to the station for questioning." I replied, "Okay, I'm parked in the driveway. I'll follow you." "We can't do that. You have to come with us," he objected. "One of you can come with me if you don't trust me, but I'll take my car so I have transportation when I leave." "I'm not getting in your car until you arrest me, and if you do, I'll sue the city for unlawful arrest," I said calmly. The young cop started to protest, but the older one said, "Okay." I asked the CSI to lock up the house when he left and gave him a spare key from my house. Then, on my way to my car, I emailed the video I had taken on my porch to the same addresses to which I had sent the bedroom video, and emailed my lawyer to have someone meet me at the station, the address of which I had gotten from the older cop. As I drove, my iPhone was still recording our conversation. I didn't answer any questions about the case, telling the cop I wanted it all videotaped at the station, but did talk to him about the Bears not having a quarterback and passer and the Cubs having trouble hitting. In the interview room, I insisted on waiting for my attorney and written confirmation that the entire interview was being recorded before we began. A female criminal defense specialist from my attorney's office arrived just 5 minutes later, and we began. My attorney had already downloaded the bedroom video to her phone, plugged the phone into the projector she had brought with her. I really liked this woman's preparedness, and scrolled it on the wall of the interrogation room for the 3 cops in the room, an elderly plainclothes cop, an assistant police chief, and an internal affairs cop. My lawyer scrolled the videotape 3 times. The first time without my commentary, the second time with my commentary, and after many questions, the third time with additional commentary. After 2 hours, they asked all the legitimate questions that could be asked. When there was a lull in the questioning, I took the bull by the horns and said, "Okay, I'm out of here. I need to find an apartment. I want Detective Frank McHale, the cop who had my wife, to be charged with assault with a deadly weapon, especially since it's clear from the bedroom videotape that he never called himself a cop." The cops groaned, but the internal affairs woman nodded. "Yes." My attorney then forwarded the bedroom videotape to 3 email addresses the assistant police chief had given her, and I left, warmly thanking the attorney who had attended the interview. The next day, I went to my regular attorney. He had a divorce specialist from his firm with him, and I told them I wanted to file for divorce as soon as possible on the grounds of adultery. I then got a lesson in Illinois divorce law. "The only grounds for divorce recognized in Illinois are irreconcilable differences," said the divorce specialist. "Normally, it is not necessary to prove that irreconcilable differences exist, and a divorce will be granted if both spouses agree to end the marriage. However, if one spouse objects to the divorce, it can be shown that adultery is the cause of the irreconcilable differences, and if the plaintiff can prove that the marriage is irretrievable because of those differences, the divorce will be granted." "So only if she objects to the divorce can I charge her with adultery?" I asked. "That is correct," he replied. "Then let's hope she'll contest it," I grinned. "File a lawsuit as soon as possible." Both attorneys agreed that they would. I quickly found a furnished apartment near my office. Through my attorney, I formally notified Missy that I would no longer contribute to the mortgage or utility payments on the house unless she agreed to put it up for sale immediately. After we had not communicated for weeks, except for her note in the photo album, and she yelled at me when I caught her having sex, 2 weeks after she had been served, Missy decided to condescend to talk to me. She left 4 messages on my cell phone and 5 texts before I responded to her with a cryptic message of my own. All messages are routed through attorneys. Never contact me directly. My prayer was answered when Missy contested the divorce. I immediately asked my attorneys for a DVD of the bedroom video and a copy of the police report and the document accusing her of adultery. Missy made another mistake by asking her friend Kathy to call me in a foolish attempt to get me to talk to Missy. When Kathy said, "Well, Missy told me that you cheated on her with that Virginia Brown girl, too," I replied, "Kathy, I need to call you back. What's your phone number?" The reason I called Kathy back was that I wanted to record the conversation, so I needed to use my work phone, not my cell phone, which had that feature in a convenient format. When I called Kathy back, she laid out all the details of what Missy had told her about me sleeping with Virginia Brown. By the end of the week, my attorney had filed a separate lawsuit against Missy for defamation. In defending the defamation suit, Missy asked her attorney to hear testimony from Virginia, the head of Outward Bound, and the main person RUI involved in the trip. Everything testified that not only did Virginia and I not have sex, but that it was impossible because of the conditions of the trip. In fact, Virginia's testimony made my case even better when she admitted that she had called my office twice after the trip, mainly to see if I was interested in hooking up, and both times he blew me off. After 4 months of legal wrangling, Missy finally agreed to a divorce, with me taking a 65% to 35% share of the defamation case, and what really pissed her off, leaving the accusation and evidence of adultery in the publicly available divorce document. Despite her best efforts through her lawyers, I never spoke to her again, I refused to meet with her. The city also fired Detective Frank McHale, and I entered into a $20,000 settlement agreement with the city. I was not expecting a large settlement, but rather to cover all my expenses and give them some insight into future behavior. Things really seemed to be looking up when, a month after the divorce proceedings were finalized, RWI decided that the Lake Forest, Milwaukee, and 2 other offices should be placed in Wisconsin Dells. This time I took the initiative and called Virginia Brown. After the initial pleasantries and telling her about the finalization of my divorce, I got to the point. "I hope we can enjoy each other's company at the retreat, Virginia," I said hesitantly. "I'd love to," she replied. "Maybe we can even extend this meeting. To say I was excited that morning on my way to the retreat would be a huge understatement. How often does a guy anticipate a sexual encounter with the woman of his dreams? In fact, I even allowed myself to wonder if a permanent relationship between me, a mere mortal, and the goddess Virginia was possible. On the first day of the retreat, Virginia and I hugged each other hard and for a long time. That day, we took every opportunity to maintain light body contact during the party and during dinner. When we danced after dinner, our body contact was not inconspicuous. At about 9 p.m., Virginia whispered in my ear, "Why don't you meet me in room 405 in 10 minutes?" My answering smile was as wide as the Mississippi River. Quiet music was playing in Virginia's room as I entered her room. Luckily, she only wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me passionately as I grabbed and squeezed her bulging ass. After we exchanged saliva for a couple minutes, Virginia whispered hoarsely, "I'm going to stop by the bathroom. Why don't you get ready for what we both want?" My smile grew wider and wider. As I took off my shirt and walked over to the hotel room table to put my shirt on the chair, I noticed something. There were 2 rings lying on the table, partially hidden by papers. I picked them up in my hands. They did indeed look like a wedding band and an engagement ring. I read the inscription on the inside of the engagement ring: "To Virginia with love, Jim," followed by a date dated 3 years earlier. "She told me she wasn't married," flashed through my mind as I started buttoning my shirt. I was just finishing buttoning the cuffs when Virginia came out of the restroom naked, save for a smile and a diamond bracelet. It was by far the best body I had ever seen. Her smile began to fade when she saw that I was fully dressed and not smiling. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I thought you were single." "The wedding ring on your desk tells a different story," I replied calmly. "And why is your last name still the same as it was in high school?" After a meaningful pause, Virginia said, My husband and I have an open marriage, and after we got married, I kept my last name for many reasons. Really? I replied, pulling my iPhone out of my pocket. Give me his cell phone number so I can make sure you're in an open marriage. Virginia looked puzzled and slightly annoyed. After another meaningful pause, she smiled and said, "Don't be such a Boy Scout, Brian. You've been dreaming of this moment for years." I put a fake smile on my face and replied, "Yes, of course," looking at the perfect shape of her breasts. I walked over to her, imprinted a scalding kiss on her lips, while massaging her magnificent mammary glands for a minute and then pulled away. As I was leaving her room, I heard her scream, "Where are you going?" After my shower, I packed my bags, called my assistant manager and told her that I had a family emergency and would not be able to stay for the retreat. On the way home, I cursed my situation. Both my wife and dream woman were cheaters. After half an hour of inner turmoil, I decided to find a simple, quiet, mediocre woman who would cause far less drama than a firebrand like my ex-wife or a dream woman like Virginia.